Hi all, good to see you, Jonathan, Jeff, and a new face. A lovely new face, a younger face than us old geezers. Kate, great to have you here, Kate. So nice.
Thank you.
So many interesting, valuable contributions in the other group that we're part of. So it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us, and you've really made an extra effort. We're fully aware of that.
Thank you.
So you joined us in a spiritual web of being here. What
Yes.
is a spiritual web of being?
So shall I read it?
I like the way.
Yeah, read it.
Okay, go for it. This is obviously taken straight from chapter 9. Those who find it necessary for the explanation of thinking as such to invoke something else, such as physical brain processes or unconscious spiritual processes lying behind the conscious thinking which they observe, fail to recognize that what an unprejudiced observation of thinking yields. When we observe our thinking, we live during this observation directly within a self-supporting spiritual web of being. Indeed, we can even say that if we would grasp the essential nature of spirit in the form in which it presents itself most immediately to man, we need only look at the self-sustaining activity of thinking.
So when is it when we observe our thinking? Must we necessarily observe thinking when we think?
So the idea of thinking is that you can never directly observe it, isn't it? This is what we've been talked about. It's like in multiple chapters at the beginning. Thinking presents itself to us, also initially as a percept, but then we can then submit that percept of thinking, what thinking serves us up with, which can then become a further material about on which we can think. So thinking can engage itself with the material it's created out of itself. Is this place where the only place where naive realism is true? We were talking about this in chapters 7 and 8. But you asked the question. Question, Jonathan. What were you thinking when you asked the question?
Well, the question's about a spiritual web of being. What is that? A spiritual web of being suggests to me something that is not physical, so it's outside the body as such. The body might be included in it, in that everything might be part of the spiritual web of being, but it's suggesting this body-free state, which the suggestion is that thinking is, because thinking itself represses the body and puts itself in the place of it. And so if we are able to observe thinking, presumably then we are observing a spiritual state of being. And then so my question then is that a really hard thing to do, that we can sort of get very cramped up and sort of or is it trying to achieve, or is it something that we naturally do but we just miss it because we're so kind of stuck in other preconceptions of how it actually is? Kate's thinking hard in the middle of the night.
So interrupt me if somebody else wanted to say something else, but I'm going to take that in a certain direction.
When Kate, you were thinking...
Until I'm interrupted by Jonathan, of course, that is.
You interrupted me. I hadn't finished that story. I just to quickly say, when Kate was thinking then, when you were thinking, Kate, I was looking at you and I was looking at a body, a percept. But what were you looking at when you were thinking?
I suppose I'm not looking at anything, am I? I'm if I'm thinking about my thinking, I try to. You do that thing where you stare into space, and that means that you're not looking at anything, and you're not
Where was
engaged
your
in the
consciousness? Where was
my
your
consciousness was. I was trying to think about how this relates to the first sentence of the book, which is, let's say, for our cognition, the concept of the tree is conditioned by the percept of the tree, right? And I was thinking about where I was going with that, and I didn't have anything else to go with it. So if Angus wants to jump in on that, let's do that.
I'm happy to, but it looked like Jeff wanted to say something.
I just want to say this is another instance that Kate said, but I was holding back in this case because I was trying to connects to something Matt said.
Jeff, I think we've got some type of sound problem.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump out and jump in again?
Do it again?
Yeah.
Or let me try this.
Jeff, have you had a tan since a week ago? Proper's nothing.
Okay. Let's take this because Kate's also. I wasn't thinking specifically about the tree, but we can play with the tree for select what is thinking, and related to select some of the spiritual exercises that I've been looking at recently. And one of the key ideas in these spiritual exercises is that it can be a tree, but apparently it's better to start off with actually man-made objects, because then you can you've got a full survey. There's nothing unknown that creeps in there. So when we look at any item, normally we will identify that as, let's say it's a book we're looking at. But if instead we insist on not just being satisfied with recognizing it as a book, but instead passing over to, okay, what other concepts can I discover in that book? I might look at the shape. And it's rectangular, and I can look at the quantity. I can look at how there's one book in this case. How many pages are there? Those are concepts. I can look at the color. That's a concept. I can look at the book. So that particular book that I'm looking at, I can look at it in a time context, and that's a little bit similar to the descriptions you've given before when you're traveling on a bus or something like that. Where's it been? Where's it going? I can and I can continue with that process the whole time. It's like building on these concepts, and what I'm there doing is becoming extremely conscious of how this thinking activity lives within me. But I'm starting to take control of the process, and I'm saying that I'm not just making do with one concept to define what I've seen, but it's the picture is growing within me as to what a book is. And I was speaking with a guy last week. It was a really interesting conversation where he was saying that also what can be of when you've spent many minutes, it's like, what concepts can I discover within that single object? Can I then rename that object down to its essential? What does it do? What's its function? And obviously you could come up with several names. Let's call it a conveyor of information. That's just the first simplicity's sake with a book. And then that becomes this far, far broader picture. And then I can look within myself, what other things that I know fall into this category. And I think that connects to what you were saying about a tree there, that we can also, we can simply see it as a tree, or we can see it as so much more than a tree. Once we begin to actively, with our thinking, say, okay, tree, feed me with inspiration, feed me with intuitions, but it can't do it itself. I have to be asking it those questions. I don't know if that links into what you were thinking.
It's making me think of how you can go in the opposite direction, where instead of, because when you jump from a book to a conveyor of information, you sort of broaden the concept, right? But say I'm looking at a tree. I don't know where I'm going with this, but if I'm looking at a tree and then I know some things about trees, and I know that it's a eucalyptus tree, for example. And so then that connects me to other eucalyptus trees, and that cognition of it belongs to the tree itself, or belongs to the concepts that we've all agreed come from the tree and is recognizable by its features. But I'm just wondering if you could do an exercise that goes deeper into just one tree itself and think about how different it is from every other eucalyptus tree you've ever seen. I don't know where that came from, but I was seeing how you were zooming out, and I'm wondering if you can also zoom in.
Why not?
You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. And for me, I always have to add this like caveat: where I am now with my thinking, that doesn't mean I'm like finished in this process at all. For me, any of these concentration exercises where you're becoming aware of how you are the creator of the thinking and you're mapping it with the world outside you, there's this participation in it. It's not just sort of like, it's like a recognition dead tree, but no, this percept can become a source of never-ending inspiration. And whether you go into the individual and sort of like park it there, or whether you start with the individual and grow it out, I don't have any strong convictions either way. As the important thing is that we're becoming aware of our thinking as a process and how it unfolds, and these magical things that happen. I mean, these connections you make. So just because we were talking about tree and you said, oh, I only see a eucalyptus tree. So my mind was saying, well, let's call it an anti-gravitation device. But where did that come from? But that could also be sort of like one way of describing it. And we can discover this inner creativity within us as we let the objects around us talk to us. And so connecting it with the spiritual web, we're beginning to live in that spiritual web when all of these amazing connections, where we can see a clear relationship to the object that we're studying, so like the impressions of the senses, but we begin to experience ourselves as living in something far greater. So this, this creativity, nobody knows where it comes from, but when you start playing with these exercises, so I'm rambling here a little bit, but if any of you guys sort of like have like fairly vivid dream lives, or periods in your life when you have vivid dream lives, you can't help but be absolutely amazed at, where does this creativity come from? What is it in me? What is living within me that creates these amazing connections where sometimes I've got no idea what they're trying to say. They're so wacky, they're so way out there. And then otherwise, they're so amazingly creative in weaving ideas together. And as I also in the dream life, we can begin to do that. But here, when we're doing it in waking consciousness, we are beginning to, I don't want to say taking control of it, but we are able to move more consciously in the process.
Yeah, I wouldn't. No, I don't think I would call dreaming like thinking. I don't think that would be a similar thing. Yeah. Again, dreaming to me is more of a feeling thing. I'm gonna have some more coffee if anyone wants to say that.
Okay.
So Jeff, you were cut off before. Do you want to speak?
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Keep talking,
Yeah.
maybe we'll find out.
Yeah, keep talking about.
Concept.
No, there's something's funny again.
I don't think
It's just your mouth and your words are not in sync.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Yeah.
perfect.
All right, I'm gonna lose the microphone.
Okay, that's working.
No, Jonathan, I don't really think what I was inspired to say is relevant to this moment.
Okay.
I do want to go back to what Kate was bringing as relates to that first sentence of the book and relate it to what Matt was saying about unconditional love. But that's not relevant to this point, I don't think, at this point.
About dreams and thinking and taking control. If dreams are kind of somehow expressing something of this just unending creativity of the universe, using the universe for want of a better word. And you know, our bodies, our lives are an expression of this unending creativity of the universe. And the spiritual web of being is an expression of the unending creativity of the universe. We can, can it be that either we can just sort of live our life being an expression of this creativity of the universe? Or is there a point at which we can kind of sort of try and jump ahead of the game in a way and try to be part of that incredible creativity of the universe, which I think is what Angus is kind of hinting at in we're using this word control. So, you know, your thoughts might go on all the time, and you might just sort of dreamily have thoughts about whatever that object is that you chose. Or you might say, no, I'm going to take a bit more directionality in this. And this is exactly, you know, what this chapter's about, isn't it? A free deed.
But if you can't do things at the same time as you can't think about your thinking at the same time as having thoughts. You can, and that reminds me of how, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that when you have a dream, when you wake is sequenced and split into themes and objects and time happened in your, you know, is traceable in your brain chemistry in like a minute. What seemed like an entire story that you unfold, and you do that with your thinking. The physical experience of a dream was just in, you know, half a minute, and only when you wake do you turn that into a story, and you can have associative thoughts coming through you all the time. But I think that's not the same as reflecting on it. Do you know what I mean? I just feel
Yes,
that,
but when you're
yeah,
can I put this to you? If you're reflecting, if you're thinking about thinking, as you I believe correctly said, you can never think about your current thinking, but you can think about your just done thinking and realize that you are doing that thinking. And so therefore the thinking that you're doing now, even though you're not sort of aware of it, it's you doing it. So you know, or else there's no way in which we can sort of wake up from just being thought. As in a dream, it's kind of like we're being thought, you know, we're just being, we're dreaming, we're being dreamed in a sense because we're not doing it. But if we think about thinking, then is it the case then that we can sort of move out of the normal everyday just associative thinking and realize that we do perhaps do it more often than maybe we think, but take control of you know, be thinking, be this creative part of this creative.
well, yeah, now I think we're using I in two different ways. And I think that has something to do with how thinking supplants the I for it, the thinking I. So I'll just say that.
sorry, I don't quite understand. The thinking supplants the I. What do you mean by the I in that?
Thinking supplants the organization that is me with an I, right? The thinking. That's why I can't. Is that why I can't be conscious of it while it's happening?
Well, something has to be before one can be conscious of it. And if you're the thing that's bringing that to creation, you have to create it before it can be.
But I feel like the part of me that's conscious of the thinking is different, like on an organizational level, than the one that did the thinking. So it's not just about, yeah.
But
something is being born into you, and then you become aware of it.
Yes.
If
There's two eyes happening right now.
Well, but yet, is it two different things? Because it was the God who saw that it was good, the same as the God who made it before it could stop and say it was good.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this has to do, this grappling that you two are doing here. I wonder if this has to do with the brain activity and the repression of the brain activity and the replacing of the brain activity with itself, thinking, meaning, and that which is, this is the maypole picture again, that which arises is the I consciousness. And at first that I consciousness is bound to the body, but it doesn't remain bound to the body. It doesn't have to remain bound to the body. It becomes independent. And so there is two eyes, but they're perhaps destined to be united in some way. And the unification happens when it's more than the unification of concept and percept. It's intuition that replaces the mental picture. And I'm conceding here for a moment, Angus, on the notion of the mental picture. It's a temporary concession. It may be a permanent one, but intuition replaces.
Oh shit!
Too much delight out of that. No, that the intuition replaces the mental picture when it accepts thinking into it as a conscious feeling act of receptivity, of perception and conception as participatory activities, not as abstract things that are brought together as like objects or something like that. Does that contribute to what you guys are talking about?
Well, I think so. Doesn't that? I've been grappling with this idea of the meaning of words and how I find it difficult to. I know what a word means, but often I have to say it again to myself inwardly. And so I have to recreate the percept. I suppose that's a mental picture in order to correct on the meaning, which is the intuitive thing that we grasp. Does that make sense? And there's a kind of an issue that's kind of difficult. It takes a lot of willing to hold on to the meaning of a word without reusing the word. It takes a lot of effort to hold on to an intuition without matching it to a mental picture or a concept.
Yeah, exactly. One picture that's coming strong to mind here is Steiner many times refers to so that the body being a mirror, you know, and the more you, or at least let's take possession of it. The more I play with that idea. Okay, so the mirror, we've got this thinking activity, being the real person, and this thinking activity staring into a mirror and seeing itself. And then obviously as it sees itself, it becomes aware of itself as it does so. But this, whilst this doesn't have an impact on the essential nature of thinking, or the essential nature of the person who's looking at it, it does change it changes the content of the thinking. So if I'm looking at a mirror image of myself, then I start focusing on details about myself. And if we're in this if we've got this spiritual activity that is thinking, that is somehow meeting up with this mirror of our physical organization, what's being created is this idea that, thinking is becoming conscious of itself, rather than just this flowing activity, this unconscious activity that typically, for example, we might have in the dream state where we're not aware that we're there. Thinking when we're awake has the potential of waking up to itself. And this is the similarity for me with these exercises that I was describing, that Scott Hicks and Scalidro and other people, they talk about having an awareness of, I am creating the world with my thinking, but it isn't just this passive relationship where the world sort of like says, I'm a book, or I'm a microphone, or I'm a teacup. It's far more. It has the potential for being far, far richer than that.
How does this self-consciousness of thinking actually, what is that? Is it that I'm thinking I've got an itchy nose and I see an image of someone itching their nose? Is it, I think, I will create a whole new revolution in, I don't know, science, and then I see somebody creating a whole new revolution in science? Is that what we're talking about? That if the body gives way to thinking, yet then provides thinking with its self-reflection, so that thinking can come to consciousness of itself, is that what we're talking about? Or are we imagining some other mystical process, or I'm not sure what?
I think we're talking about growing into this spiritual activity, becoming ever more conscious of how real it is in our lives, how it's always there. We're often invisible to the reality of thinking. We're in normal consciousness, we're more aware of the reality of the world around us, the feeling life that we have, the will life that we have, all of these different percepts. We treat them as real. But when we start understanding the relationship of the conceptual life, the product of thinking, to all of these percepts, we realize how this is what is making it whole. That which is giving us knowledge. We are growing into this realm. So for some reason, my mind sort of like went off into thinking a little bit about a similarity with search engines. So you have imagine a very limited search engine that's only able to access certain aspects of the world, certain aspects of understanding, and then you get an upgraded search engine, and that's able to access still further realms, which then help you to make understand of what's going on in your perceptual life.
So what are the footprints of thinking? Jeff, go ahead. Just put that to one side.
Well, I wanted to pick up this. Maybe it's related to the provisional self that he talks about in Riddles of Philosophy, but pick up this picture of this arising self that we're operationally creating. We're creating a self. And it's ongoing. It's an ongoing project. It's fairly new in human history, actually. It's probably right around the time the novel was born and psychology was born, and that we're around Steiner's time, that we were actually getting to the point of being a participatory agent in creating a self. And there's no enriching experience without creating that self. It's necessary. This is why I don't like, and I apologize to our Jungian archetypal friends and all that stuff, but this is why I don't like this idea of shadow work, because I think it's bullshit. We're creating a vessel in order to incarnate into it, so that we become Christ-like as individuals. Like this is the long range goal here, friends. You know, it's on the CV. I've got a lot of experience at this job. I'm trying to become an individual, and I'm 59 years old now, and I've gotten pretty damn good at it, so I can speak to it a little bit. I tongue in cheek there a little bit, but it's a holy act, and so I get a little nervous and need a little humor. And I also think, I was thinking during this, and maybe this is relatable, and I'll try to relate it if not to if it's not relatable immediately to other people, is I was thinking of Shelley's Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And that we can create a monster. And we are creating monsters. And we don't have an educational system that does anything other than create monsters, at least in our world. And we have a public relations industry that fosters monstering as a way to develop this inevitable relationship with this double, that is arising, like it or not, in our culture. And it's seen in many ways, say symptomatically in our technologies, for example. It's described so well. Again, here's another way to describe the Narcissus myth and the denial of the soul to the monster, right? And so Frankenstein builds this monster without any sense of consequentiality, right? Good intentions, but out of a Kantian paradigm does he build the monster, right? And then the townspeople are like, that's a threat to me because that's my double, and I'm not recognizing it as my double, and I don't know what to do with that. And so then they bring torches and pitchforks, and they want to kill the monster. And the monster hasn't been taught to develop this self, which is this beautiful chapter is about self-development. It's about the incremental picture of self-development toward freedom, so that freedom and knowledge unite as an act of love, or as a inhabiting of a loving double, say. And I always I flash back to Mel Brooks' version of Young Frankenstein, and it's sort of humorous, but this idea that this is a really intelligent person, this is not a monster, but this is somebody who doesn't know how to deal with their feeling life. And look at children walking around in our world today, like they just have no concept of mastery of their feeling life. They've been coddled to such a degree that they feel like they have to that you have to provide everything for them as relates to their safety, their answers to their questions. My wife's a teacher. Their grades have to constantly be adjusted because they deserve it. That's the way that it's supposed to happen. And we just have no answer for this double that's rising in our culture. Yet we do, and here it is.
Yeah, we do in here. Can I speak to that? Does anyone have anything to add?
Oh, please.
This idea of the monster, I think that's really what has been making me nervous in this chapter, because for the first time, I mean, we haven't even really gotten into the meat of it, which is how willing is organized and how we can find the free part of that willing. But to me, it seems too simple. It seems, yes, okay, I can take that, and then I put it on my own life, and I just find myself that I'm going around and around. Am I acting out of love? Am I acting out? It becomes this trap, because suddenly if we want to act out of love, act out of thinking. But then that becomes a command for myself because I don't know how to accept that. All I know is how to accept commands and rules, and maybe they're not outwardly imposed, but I'm reading a book, right? I'm reading a book, and now I'm turning that into a law for myself, and that's what makes me nervous. How do I actually be free instead of putting this framework over looking at my past actions and projecting them back onto my future actions? And I think it has a lot to do with being this monster and being mixed up with my feelings and my thinking and my willing, and not knowing which one is which, and not knowing how to differentiate them. And we were talking last week about how important it is to differentiate them and then bring them back together, because if we don't, it's so hard to know where we are when we're acting and when we're thinking. And I definitely don't know where I am a lot of the time, and I doubt myself a lot, and I doubt other people, and then it gets into this pitchforky thing where you're just not looking for the Christ in other people, and instead you're only having character clashes, and it's like none of us even want this. We're generating a movie script with our characters all the time and clashing against each other, and that's how I feel a lot of the time. And that's why the chapter is hard for me, because it's so simple. It's sort of
Well, the book's not meant to be like a Bible to bash yourself or anyone else over the head with. So, I mean, my recommendation to you is to throw the book across the room in disgust, and then
see if you feel sorry for the book afterwards.
or frustration or whatever it is, and then just be patient. You're still young, and come back to it and find when you have that care and love for what the book may be offering you, which must be conciliant, I would say, with care and love for yourself, because that's the book's really only meant to help you to check yourself and life. Do you see what I'm saying? So you are the first thing.
It does help me do that. And it's not going to be easy. I don't want it to be an easy thing.
Can I add something, an interesting observation?
Yeah.
Because I've got I would like to call it the opposite problem.
I think you do. That's what I think about you anyway. After listening to this, I think we're standing on opposite sides of the circle a lot.
But
anyway,
I also recognize I need to understand. I'll try to describe it. So one of the things, I rewatched yesterday's video, and I was listening to my own thoughts as I was listening to these people at the same time, and I was hearing all of this doubt, which I don't have. And I'm not saying that as a virtue. Not having doubt can also be a weakness. But I do find it interesting that, and it's in that sense that I see us as useful. It's like real friends are not the same. They contribute each other. It's like they're able to see things from a perspective that you're not able to. So when I think about that particular weakness of my own, and I think a lot about it when I think about, it's like how Stein often talks about Christ really comes into your life when you're desperate. So if I'm not feeling desperation, then shit, I'm in trouble, type of thing. And I just wanted to sort of like add that to your picture, because it is interesting how we are fundamentally different. Everybody, not just the four of us, but everybody are different. They've all got their own questions that they're asking, and when true friends get together, you're able to talk about these things without one having to say, my perspective is right and the other one is wrong. It's like, no, this is Kate's perspective, this is Jeff's perspective, and this is John's perspective, Jonathan's perspective, and they're all battling with their own questions. But if we can, it's like, share in that conversation, then I think we come out as more rounded characters capable of seeing things from multiple perspectives. Yeah. So, but you said yeah, you did see it. Did I understand you correctly, Kate, that you saw us as opposites in that sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I've been listening to all of these videos, and it's only a kind of dim, intuitive grasp, but I just feel like I feel like I don't know if this might be completely presumptuous, but if we're thinking about a circle, I feel like Jeff and I are on one side of the circle, and you and Jonathan are on the other side of the circle, but you and Jonathan are quite further apart than me and Jeff. That's how I see it. I don't know. Something the way we approach things and what we want out of it.
Yeah.
What we want out of it is, that's how I feel.
And the beauty of it, as we listen to each other, we're broadening our understanding of this whole like strange thing that the human being is.
Yeah, it's been really interesting watching myself have disagreements with all of you while I'm passively listening, driving in my car. And then eventually, going, oh wait, no, I could never have thought of that if I didn't disagree. That position that they have because they disagree is so beautiful because I would never have seen the crystal from that angle. If we all agreed.
It might be an interesting experiment to say what of the monster strikes us most and what of the Christ strikes us individually most.
The monster,
yeah, the Frankenstein monster, because then that, I don't know, just if we're at a loss for words, because then we will get 4 different characterizations of the same, or of the leading to the same thing.
You want to do a little thought experiment, don't you, Jonathan?
If you like to call it that, yeah.
I mean, the question is, who are you? Not what you intellectually connect with, right? I intellectually connect with the Christ, and I experience through this work like no other work. I experience a relationship with the Christ. Hands down, nothing like it for me. I have similar feelings when working with other things, artistic things, and even religious documents and that sort of thing. This is not a religious document. It's not a cookbook, as you say, Jonathan. But it is a model. Not a model. That's not the right word. Not the model. It's
like a picture.
It is it's a living document that has in seed form. He walks the walk of everything he describes in Riddles of Philosophy as seed planting. That's what we're doing. Seed planting in the double, say, in the soul, in this independent creature that we've created that is unique to every single individual, so much so that we're each describable as a species. So I have this relationship with that double because I'm living inside it. Now, that for me is keeping it real because that's true. It's just true. I've experienced the limits. I experience where I rely on maxims. I experience that I want to break free from that. I don't want to be bound like the flower to the tree. I want to be a butterfly chasing the sun rays, so to speak. I want to break free. And we have this, it's an irrepressible desire. If you guys haven't read this Crayon Buell thing, Jesus, it's a powerful thing. And the way in which he sheds light on Steiner, and Steiner sheds light on the way in which you would read it. This is a real contemporary with Steiner on this chapter. He doesn't hold a candle to the breadth of what Steiner's bringing, but to this chapter, it's a freaking tour de force. So I experienced that, but I only experienced the Christ in me as I engage with the double, because the double is born out of this Christ indwelling Holy Spirit, which is the individual nature of the triune, right? It's the thing that is, it's the reason why I suggest it's the reason why we have instinct, which is human instinct, which is different than animal instinct. It is uniquely human because of our psychophysical organization, say, and that we're not going to have intuition sustained until we come until we can transform instinct into that which is receptive of this ground of being that we're calling thinking. So I think I'm not saying it's dishonest to say that that you more relate to the Christ because I think it's important, right? And it might be just speaking to my immaturity, I mean, you mentioned that, yeah, I'm a sort of permanent romantic, I guess.
I would like to come back to what you said, Jeff, about the shadow, because I was being reminded of the conversation we've had about the unconscious before, where you've unpacked it, and I feel that I've begun to understand you better because I don't have that relationship to the unconscious. And then when you were talking about the shadow is bullshit, Kate laughed her head off, and so I'm interested. What's going on there? Because for me, again, this shadow, it ain't a problem. That's not saying it can't be a problem in the future, but for me now, it's not. What's going on with you two there?
Okay. Well, this is interesting because I came up with this. Well, I came up with this. This became a thing in my life after I read Truth in Science. And my dear friend, told me that I should not read any Steiner until I read Truth in Science and Philosophy of Freedom. I wasn't allowed to read anything else by him until I read those things. So that's what I'm doing. And but when I read Truth and Science, Truth and Knowledge, what became clear to me is that there is only what is there and what I know about it. And unconscious, shadow, is sort of like this negative thing. There is nothing there. It's like this imagined hole behind everything where my dreams go to die and my disappointed hopes are there, and it forms like this evil or resentful core, which is a horrible thing. When you really take the shadow and take what people say about the shadow and say that it's controlling us and we need to face it and we need to... It's quite a sad thing if that is true. But it can't be true if I take the philosophy of freedom seriously, because all there is what my eye, the light, shines onto. The darkness is not. It's not. As soon as I'm looking into the shadow, and it's obviously the shadow work is helpful for people because it's a way of them to understand this process of looking into the darkness, finding something, and having that relationship between percept and knowledge. And that can be about yourself and your feelings and or your dreams, and it can be about the outside world too. But having this shadow, having this unconscious, is the same thing as having a thing in itself, because it's unknowable, it's unseeable, it kind of comes into the world and comes into your life in ways that you can never know and is mysterious. But that's not a real thing. So that's why I...
But it is. That's just the thing. It is, but it doesn't need to be.
It doesn't need to be real. No.
Yeah.
It's a whole at the center of it.
It's a real thing, but it's not a real thing as a theoretical thing.
Right.
It is the thing that it's our soul. It's our damn soul. We just need to take hold of it. It's a process, and it's difficult. And it's, as I mentioned somewhere earlier in the book group, it's a terrible prospect, because if you also are following the Christ path, then you're gonna have, as I mentioned, as I've experienced it, that's a cold reality, right? Because you're gonna have to suffer that same glorious fate, say. So I think when we're talking about it, what we're talking about is the theoretical aspect that Edward von Hartmann, for example, brings to bear that then is later picked up by Freud and Jung, and some largely, right? And they popularized this unconscious. And then here we go with the whole public relations industry in the 20th century being able to exploit the desires of people and actually co-opt and hijack the desires and the deepest welling spiritual impulse of people as self-loathing. First of all, a self-loathing narrative that they deny that exists as a spiritual impulse. This is why I suggest reading Krahenbuhl and his idea of negative spirituality, coming out of Kant. But that if we don't come to terms with this double, that doesn't mean shadow work, because as I understand most ideas of shadow work, and I think we might see eye to eye with Chad in this case, that what he refers to as shadow work is really double work in the existentially epistemologically established sense that philosophy of freedom does establish this double in this chapter, I think, and I think that the thing that's objectionable is that the shadow is that thing that is the terrible thing that arises out of the depths of your animalic nature, and that is rooted generally in evolutionary ideas that are bound to physiology in a linear process of evolution.
In what sense is it non-theoretical? That's the soul.
In the sense that we're grappling with it right now. Like I experience my limits. Do you experience your limits? Do you experience the way in which you are not bringing percept and concept together perfectly and united? You're not replacing the mental picture with the intuition, which I would argue is later on is a fluid mental picture, but that's chapter 12. So like that is, and it's existentially established, I believe, in this book, the moment that thinking enters into the psychospiritual organization, which doesn't just mean the brain activity. It means all the ways in which we are grounded as beings down into our life processes. That's what we're working with in order to give rise to this real being. It's like calling your child the unconscious. Why would you do that? Why would you not love it?
Right. Just before I came on here, I was having a conversation with a fellow, and he described it in a way which seems very clear to me, that at sleep, the astral and the I separate out from the physical body, and the etheric weakens the life body. So that's why our body is asleep and regenerating. It's just a body and life on the bed, and then we're elsewhere. At death, the etheric, we separate out all those others from the physical body, and that's why there is life no more. And he described it as and now this point where what we're trying to do is to separate the I, the spiritual being, out of the astral, because the astral is a mess. We've made a mess, do you know what I mean? Just to sort of get here. And if we can separate our I into the spiritual, then you can sort of look back on the astral and try to sort out and begin to sort out the mess.
That's what I'm trying to do. That's what is so hard.
I'm not sure I agree with
this.
this. Go ahead. I'm not sure I agree with the sequence of that process. Like, it would be great if that's almost a final sequence in the transformation of the soul life, say. I think the first thing is that there's the transformation of the astral to the degree that the astral can look into the etheric.
But how can you transfer the astral if you can't come out of it and then, start to make judgments about it? This was this fellow's point.
Fair enough. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so whilst I've been listening to you guys, and I've also been thinking, okay, so this opposite, where do I experience myself as opposite to what's being what's being talked about here. And when I look back, if I think about just COVID as like the most recent example, but like if I look further back into my biography as well, one of the things that I refuse to take on board is fear. So anything that is somehow by design would have the possibility of inducing fear in me, I have to reject. I have to. I can't say why I do it, but it's been with me since it's an extremely young age. And again, I'm not trying to paint myself as paint this in any virtuous light, because there are weaknesses that possibly can come with that. Just recognizing who I am, but I do recognize when I meet somebody like Steiner, who connects the aspect of Christ and fear not, and fear as the disease of Ahriman. My whole soul rejoices. It's a confirmation of a part of me that's has got a healthy instinct,
or a healthy intuition.
or characterological disposition. What I mean, where are we in all of this? Because I was also thinking that these people who take on this shadow idea that you were describing earlier, or the unconscious that you've talked about before, is this also a reflection of an own personal battle that we brought with us? Because there is this idea that Prokofiev develops in his book about the philosophy of freedom, that characterological disposition, or subjective disposition as it's called in the recent translation, is another word for karma. And so in our interests, and how the mental concepts that we take on board, the mental pictures, I should say, that we take on board as being valid, as being true, they also must somehow be a reflection of who we have been and what we have learnt in the past. At least that's my best understanding of it. That's how I conceive it.
And always reserving the possibility that one doesn't have to be held to the past.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all. It's disposition. It's quite an interesting word, not the position you are in now, but disposition held by the past conditions. And if we can get in the position which we are now, then there's no disposition. One's actually real in the moment. I guys, I have to dash. I'm going to listen to you, but I don't think I can join in any further.
Okay, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Picking up on this, I always call it the characterological predisposition, because it's both that which you inherit, right, from yourself. Say, this is lecture 1, volume 1, karmic relationships. It goes right into sympathy and antipathy as preconfigured, the preconfigured vessel and constitution, which and their temperament, that we enter at birth in order to grapple with that as a karmic overcoming, say. But we also build with ideas of the shadow and unconscious. We build on the predispositions that build on the bias. So the reason also that you're I was what I thought about when you were talking about your I would say intuitional or your intuitional resistance to fear is the reason why we agree on the absolute crazy making nonsense that was the pandemic, right? Because it was all coercive and fear driven. It's like, there's something wrong here, because they came right out with that stuff, and they're sitting on top of 100 years of public relations industry ability with new technologies to play their little informational war games with. So this is one of the things Philosophy of Freedom has helped me do, actually, is to go, what? No, there's no foundation for this. I'm not an expert, but I can traverse your discipline and see whether or not you are representing a science that has an epistemological foundation in reality. I can do that for sure, and everybody can do it. But so the point about this is that we have to take up this characterological disposition, and in the mental picturing is a very important stage in that process. And I don't know anybody who's operating in a state of absolute intuition all the time, who've brought more from chapter 12, who've been able to bring moral imagination and moral technique together, and of just operating, seeing reality in a constant flow state, say, or something like that. But it's possible, and it takes lifetimes. And that's what this chapter is saying to me. This is an incremental process, and it's deeply mysterious with the ground of being. I loved what Max brought yesterday, because it just popped for me. It was like, yeah, I've been trying to say that. I can't. Max is a professional academic, and so he speaks similar to Matt in this sense. So their discipline allows them a certain sort of constraint to say things in this way that is sort of not as messy as the way I might say them.
As all of us.
And somewhat irresponsible sometimes, perhaps. Sorry, Chet.
No, I Jacob, Kate.
Oh, I was just thinking about, in a certain sense, you need to reject something to be beautiful. Like there's a process of rejection and beauty, and there's some discipline in that. I don't know why that came in my head, but I think it has something to do with thinking, actually. Being able to reject and being able to differentiate. Sort of like, the mental picture has a lot to do with that, and sort of the flowering, which, I don't know, I agree, and Matt and Max are very nice to listen to.
I'd like to comment on that very specific thing, and then relate it to the maypole thing, because that just was something I had not fully worked on, and I've been thinking about it a lot since. So I think you've got something here, and that is that we experience beauty in our soul, beauty in the sense of it's a feeling, it's a cognitive feeling, right? You don't have words for that which is before you, but it seems to be revealing something to you. Like the clouds have gestures that are so beautiful that they have to be a language, right? I mean, they just have to be. So I was thinking about this maypole. So it's not that thinking and intuition are poles in the sense of in a horizontal sense, and that the I consciousness is the erect thing that rises. It is that, but it's that the intuition is inherent to us in our disposition. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to be human beings who could cultivate the intuition. And instinct is one instance of intuition, I would suggest. And then there's thinking, which is sort of coming down and touching this individuated to the degree that one has been individuated through lifetimes. But even if we're just talking developmentally, you could make the same picture. And then that creates this pole, which is the I consciousness. And then sympathy and antipathy are the things that are weaving draping these personality colors around. And so when you were talking about that, you have to have antipathy first before you recognize to be drawn to the beauty of something. And it's in that unspeakable feeling of beauty is the marriage of sympathy and antipathy in the eye. It's the whole, not negation of one or the other, of one overcoming the other, but the absolute tension of the two of them. And that you could say that's also love.
Yeah, to love is to allow for the difference between. Yeah, love occurs when the difference is maintained but transcended.
The complete acceptance, so as he talks about, isn't he? So the complete acceptance of another person's right to live their own life as they see fit. And this is one point that didn't come out in the conversation yesterday that I think is helpful for understanding actually that the problem that arises there. So like, because you had this seeming this problematic issue. Yeah, well, so like somebody can come along and say, some criminal can come along and kill somebody and say, oh yeah, I was just sort of acting out of my highest intuition. And they're actually these three at the bottom of this slide. We've got the three motives basically. The greatest possible good of mankind purely for its own sake, the progress of civilization or the moral evolution of mankind towards ever greater perfection, and the realization of individual moral aims grasped by pure intuition. And when those become the foundation on which those are the ground out of which your motives grow, then automatically in there you've got a respect for every other individual on this planet. So therefore, to say that you could kill somebody out of a moral intuition, it's sort of like, well, okay, how does this square with these three supreme motives, which Steiner does seem to be like setting up here, that this is, if we are universal beings, then it makes sense that we also want the best for the whole of mankind. We are in this together. We are not separate beings. We are all part of one big organism. And civilization is an expression of that moving forward of mankind in this process. And then I am that individual part within that process, which is also contributing. And then I do it in line with my own, according to my own like particular strengths that I have. So those things that I can contribute towards society. And so for me, these three moral maxims, I think he calls them, doesn't he? They become actually really key for being able to, the tricky questions you were asking yourself there, Kate, in conversation. Is it really love that is going on here, or is it selfish? If we ask ourselves seriously and honestly, is it for the bettering of, or is it working towards these motives? For me, in my own simplistic way of thinking, and always reserving like the right for like, I might be deceiving myself, but if I feel myself to be in tune with this, then I can feel more comfortable in my thinking that I'm not. And then events might come along and like, with Angus, no, you were deceiving yourself, and then I take corrective action. So these points are, we didn't really talk about them much in the conversation yesterday, and I know in previous readings I've skipped over them as sort of like, oh yeah, there we go, so like creating moral maxims. But actually reflecting on them here, I really begin to experience how they're the core, or a core part of this chapter, a core part of ethical individualism, which is easy to skip over.
What's
I wa-
because when I was saying, I've been kind of analyzing my actions.
So say that again, Kate. We can't. You're,
Can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you. It's just it went a little bit quiet.
It's difficult to bring such moral maxims into every. You can't. It's hard as one person to see how my individual small actions, which I hope to and take. I hope to act out of a free place a lot of the time, as much as I can. They're not often big picture things, you know. And if I put those questions to them, I could easily answer. I'm thinking of things like acts of kindness and just moments where you decide to speak up, or moments where you decide to commit to something. Those sort of actions, where it's sort of in the grand scheme of these moral maxims, does it matter if I do it or not? I'm not sure. And it does make me feel like I'm defeating myself, and that I'm. Do you know what I mean? So I find it more helpful to go directly to the intuition that guides those maxims instead of putting the maxims, using the maxim criteria for my action. Because if I do that, I feel I suppose.
Yeah, I would say that we're suffering from moral maxims right now with the hot mess of ideologies being thrown around as if they were, as if people were rightly certain about what's best for the climate, what's best for humanity, what's best for underprivileged groups, what any of it. Like it seems to me that it's a giant creature that you have to bring into a small house in order to work out whether or not you're actually not just trampling everybody in your path because you want to do good, right? And the key in this chapter is you know you're doing good if you're loving your deed, if you're doing it out of the love for doing it. It will meet these moral maxims. It will just be differently applicable at different times, because what's best for humanity may not be best for may not be the best for you just can't be right about it, because you can't encompass all of humanity. Which humanity are you talking about? Like this lockdown thing, was that good for humanity, or did it kill millions of people in starving countries, right? Not to mention the experimentation that was going on on those peoples in those countries in the name of goodness. So this moral maxim thing is, I see it on a continuum, right? Like the small acts of goodness out of love are on a continuum with that which betters the place that you found, say, or something like that. As far as the love goes, how do you know that you're acting out of love? Well, isn't it that that this goes back to the first sentence of this chapter, and this is why he puts it there, I believe. It is, my concepts are conditioned by my percept, right? When are my concepts not conditioned by my percept? It's in love, because my love is not conditioned. It's unconditional. And unless it's unconditional, it's not acting out of the unification of concept and percept. It's giving lip service at best to the unification, intellectually, say. And the intellect cannot love.
No, that's when. Oh, that reminds me of what David said. About how he was confused about what we were talking about, because his idea of thinking was intellect, and his idea of love was not intellect. And yes, if only he'd said that at the beginning, so that we could show him that we agree with him, and just
You-
a little bit.
Perhaps it's so beautiful you had to reject it first.
Yeah.
Because I still like have trouble. I'm almost apologetic when I say when I think about people watching this and we're talking about thinking as the ground of being. Nobody thinks like that, right? I mean, you have to experience it first. And what he does is takes us through the experience. He understands all the presuppositions. He understands all the biases. He all too well. He understands them. And that's why he takes up other people's arguments as if they were true, because there's an element of truth in all of them, and then moves them beyond themselves.
Yeah.
I didn't want to trivialize in any shape or form what you were saying there, Kate, about like this self-doubt, because it's extremely this ability to be honest with ourselves is absolutely crucial here, because it is so easy for us to deceive ourselves about whether these are loving actions or self-loving actions that we are performing. I didn't in any way want to communicate that this is easy, but how I try to think about it. But then when Jeff added like another layer, which I think was important, so when he was more specific about the lockdowns and things like that, then I think you can add other dimensions to this thinking. Well, if there are people that are disagreeing with me about this, whether this is good for the good of mankind or for the good of civilization, etc., etc., and I have to shut them down rather than listen to their arguments, then that is already a sign that there's something problematic going on there, this inability to listen to the multiple perspectives. Because I think it's like theoretically we can understand why you might jump to a lockdown as a solution if it really was a crazy, dangerous, so like 50% mortality rate virus. Yeah, then you got a case. But so then you've got other facts on the ground that say no. We've got a recent case in the UK where the chief medical advisor said directly he was one of the chief advisors to the government at the time. It's come out in all these WhatsApp leaks that he said this virus just isn't dangerous enough to warrant a emergency use authorization. That was from an expert, but that was never talked about in the media. It never got out. It's only coming out now 2.5 years later. But people who were informed about this, I know I can give me 5 minutes. I could give you like a dozen names of different people who are saying in May 2020, saying what we're being told. So the reason I'm describing this is, so we've got these moral maxims as like on one side of the evaluation argument, but then it is also important for me to listen to like multiple perspectives on a specific action, which then like go further to informing me whether a particular course of action is correct. And in that, I also would include my own actions.
Go ahead, Kate.
It's nice that we're talking about this. Because I just think that my decision not to get vaccinated was a decision out of love for the beast. I do think that because I had all the opportunities to, and there was no fear involved, and I wasn't afraid of the vaccine so much as I loved more that by not doing it, I was affirming something that I believed in, and I was supporting other people who would agree with my decision. So in that way, I am grateful for the whole thing that happened, for the opportunity for me to act freely. That's what I say.
I like that that view of it, because it's affirming, really, and it's affirming in the face of a lot of coercion for you to act differently than that. And this work is a training in how not to get fooled again, so to speak, to bring in the who to the program. Um, it is a training in being able to know. Well, I mean, I mentioned it, the epistemological basis for that which is being presented. But I think of this term that to live in love of your own deeds, and to understand, to let live in the understanding of other people's will. And that means, in our day and age, to understand the way people's will have been hijacked. So that's an important discernation that was not absolutely true in Steiner's time, though he warned us in a lecture series, many lecture series actually, that public opinion would become more and more an authoritarian, like no authoritarian tyranny on earth previous, that public opinion would become the authoritarian configuration. And that's frightening and all of that stuff if you choose to be, if it scares you, but one has to overcome the fear and just realize that if you don't understand the other person's will, then you're missing half that say social motto, or that psycho-spiritual social motto.
Picking up on, so continuing to run with the insanity of the last couple of years, one of the things that I thought was so interesting is that this was the first time I saw Steiner go mainstream, with the memes being created about his predictions about. And I thought that was really, really interesting, how from sources that you would never connect with, like any spiritual tradition, people are sort of like recognizing, whoa, something's happening here. And I do think we got a real explosion of people, of real true free individuals who rejected completely what was being thrown at them left, right, and center from the medias. And in that sense, it's like, through this tragedy, so many people have woken up to a new level that I thought I was aware of corruption and like lots of things prior to this, but that it could be on this like amazingly profound global level, that was beyond anything that I could have imagined beforehand.
Testament to that is, before lockdown, if I looked up the word Ahriman, you get very few hits. But now you get a lot of hits.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
People are waking up slowly, but slowly and surely people are waking up. Yeah. I wanted to, one of the things that was also said in the conversation yesterday, and which you Matt talked about, it's like this New Testament aspect of it. Kate, you talked about it with sort of like the it's like, oh, this is more the metaphor. This is real. And so the reason I've done this slide, because I think you were talking about something that it is so important to connect. And Jeff, you were talking about it very clearly as well, about this Christ imbued thinking that is talking through this text. And obviously the one on the left is he describes it's like an Aramanic society. It's like inject some stimulus to action into his mind. At once, the clockwork of his moral principles will set itself in motion and run its prescribed course. So, like, this is completely antithetical to ethical individualism that Stein is espousing. And then he goes on to say, no, I do something for the love of my action. And in yesterday's conversation, I talked about John 4 and John 6, and I was listening to John 6 again this morning, and there are some words which come so close to the essence of ethical individualism here as well. And I've highlighted the ones here. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. I think for me that's a beautiful description of one way of experiencing this thinking activity that we live in and we can grow into. There was also something which I didn't pick up on yesterday, but in chapter 8 there's this description of something like coming down, of falling down into humanity, which is very reminiscent of a similar idea. And more from John, for I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. This, the creator of all life. And it's the word will is important for me in this, and it really, so like, it rings extremely true. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life. This is what happens this is what is happening to me as I read this type of text. Metaphor is becoming more than a metaphor. It's becoming absolute reality. It's allowing me to connect the dots, allowing me to say, no. These are more than words. There's a spiritual truth living in these words. And you use this word ruminate so beautifully so many times yesterday. It really captures this idea of these are something. I don't just eat a meal once and I'm satisfied. No. I have to imbue myself with these thoughts time and time again, so that they can give their fruits, so that they can permeate my will life. They can permeate my conceptual life, so that I strive ever further to represent the essence of Christ-inspired thinking.
Yeah, I love the nutrition picture, because it is also more than a metaphor. It's a life process that operates on many different levels, not just in the gut, right? And so what we're doing is pulverizing the food. We're destroying it in order for us to get what is essential out of it, which is the life in it, which is why biodynamics, to get what is life in it, and then that mysteriously disappears and becomes us. So the bread of that gives a whole different picture to the bread of life, and I think that's probably what you're saying there, Angus. It's just so gorgeous. Isn't it strange that this book of pure philosophy, you too, is evoking this imagery of the Christ mystery? Like, I didn't expect Matt to bring in the New Testament. Like, and I know he's open to a lot of things, but as a scholar, you sort of have to be careful there, right? Because your reputation is at stake. But he's a fearless one. So
the eating thing is really important. We come across the idea of the cosmic and worldly nutrition streams. Have you heard of this idea? Where basically our bodies are actually sustained by what we perceive through sensation, and our mind is sustained by what we take through nutrition. And that is such a confusing thing. But when you break down what's actually going on in digestion, it's actually a process of sensation and a knowing of the food and turning the differentiated into a synthesized mush. And how perception is taking, it's the opposite. It's hard. The perception part of it is very difficult for me to explain. But I see a freedom feel, yes, it must be true. It must be true. And but what I need to focus on is that I don't run away with the fairies. Thinking of it, how, like trying to become dutiful and harmless, but instead still look at my own life, see the practical needs of my own life, and try and reject it in the name of being amazing and beauty. But because I want to keep my particularity and keep what's in front of me, and because that's what I can't lie to myself that I can just because these things are true, I can now live.
If and when you have kids, you'll get the perception side, because that is how they are built up. They learn language by basically taking the world and putting it in their pores, in their mouth, in their fist in their mouth. They learn language in these leaps and bounds, and the way in which they imitate their environment. They become their environment to such a large extent through this imitative kinesthetic process, where this to me also speaks to this coherence of instinct that is uniquely human, and it's born into children, that is the foundation for the possibility of a growing sustained ability to be intuitive in relationship to their own reality meeting the reality around them. And if they're allowed a safe environment, if they're allowed clothes that are educational to them, in a sense, that everything is an education for them, and that's their nutrition, is they're building them up, right? They only need mother's milk for the first few years, right? For actually, because the mind is outside them in a certain sense. I see in this development of these two streams, the motive stream and the driving force stream, as the model for an education for children and an education for adults. Now, there's not really an education for adults formalized in our culture, but we do have Waldorf education, and it's the only one based on this profound psycho-spiritual reality. And I want to promote that, because it itself is under its own attack from popular opinion, radical secularization, right? And so, but here it is, right here. It's clear as day. This is like, here is the process through which you take hold of your inherited body, you overcome it, you make it your own body, you develop the ability to do the same with your feeling life, so that you're to harness these two passions that create the creative tension that allows you to arise in between. That's what that education is about in a simplistic way.
I'm so happy that I had that in my life, and it sets me up to take this book on board. It really has. It really has.
You're a Waldorf kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Jesus, no wonder.
Until I was about 10. I went to waters.
Okay, we've been going 135. If there's nothing else, whilst you were talking, I was thinking this coincidence of motive and driving force, or motive power, in my translation. I think it did come across yesterday, and how it is absolutely key. But apart from that, I think we've covered everything. So we can go to the art moment. What have I got here? Jeff and I, we haven't been so very consistent in this, but we try to bring something that's got nothing to do, well, at least on the surface, with China, and then you realize there's something far deeper going on here. So I discovered this music, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, and it's I'll just read the text on the screen there, so that other people can hear this, and then link it to the music. So this lady, she's talking about an experience on December 7th, 2002, at approximately 3:45 a.m. An experience quite unexpected and transformative occurred. It was unlike anything ever experienced previously. The experience transcended words and earthly language. It included lights and warmth, as if the entire body were bathed in a large egg-like golden blanket. There was kindness and beauty. There was gratitude. And then there was the voice and the music. The voice emanated from deep within, and was truly wondrous, gentle and loving beyond description. It communicated a message of love, joy, and peace. The communication was unmistakably clear, but silent. As the message was received, it was written down. As the words appeared on the page, it became clear they were the lyrics to a song. The music for the song flowed in the same manner as the lyrics, effortlessly, guided by an invisible power that defies any earthly description. The song became I Am Love. And if you read the rest of this story, it tells the story of a lady who had this experience, most probably an experience of the etheric Christ, a gift of karma, if I understand it correctly, because it led to like a 12-year search on her own part to understand what on earth had happened to her. It's like when she had this experience. And she goes quite deeply into how it's like a rereading of the Bible with the help, and especially the Pauline experience, and Steiner's take on what was actually going on with St. Paul on the road to Damascus there. And this is described in the rest of this text. I won't play in the song. What I'll do is I'll leave a link in the show notes. But it reflects another aspect of this spiritual journey we're all on. It can I hear it's like I hear the accusation leveled at me that this is just an intellectual exercise. It's far richer than that. And when I find other people like this lady and her song communicating, I want to surround myself in that atmosphere of people who are treading a similar or have gone further on the spiritual path than I currently am, so that I can be inspired by what they might have already experienced. And coming back to the beauty of the conversations, this conversation today, the conversations we've had in the past, Matt and Ashton's group, this is why these conversations are so important, and so inspiring and so life-giving to me, because we are connecting. We are a community of people who recognize that for reasons that are very difficult to explain, but which are patently obvious to us, we somehow feel very different to the majority of people around us. This really does feed us with an inspiring, life-giving energy. Yeah, so when we finish this, it's like you can go and discover this lady for yourself. If Jonathan will be listening to this later. She did one album that was like inspired by the texts of Rumi. I'm not particularly familiar with Rumi, but it seems to me that Jonathan is, so he can investigate that. And perhaps one final thought linked to this. I think this is one of my own personal dreams about where this community goes, that we are able to share things of beauty with one another. So that these stories that inspire us, and that confirm and strengthen these beliefs, and they become enriched as well. There was Matt. He talked a long time ago about an Australian lady called Loment, and the name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, I managed to find a link to her being interviewed. And it's a fantastic interview. And these inspiring moments, it's important that we become a community of people where we share these beautiful experiences that we've stumbled serendipitously upon. As say, this might be nice for somebody else in the community. Yeah. So that's my piece of art for today.
For the record, I brought Shelley.
You brought Frankenstein.
Yeah.
The monster. yes, that's important. Cool. Okay. Thank you so much. It's life-giving. This. Thank you. I'll press the record. End of recording.